Welcome back to A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. We are continuing to read the Russian short story In the Cart, or The Cart, by Anton Chekhov from 1897. And we are continuing to read this wonderful short story and also work with Professor George Saunders out of Syracuse on getting through this. We are reading these books recommended to understand the art of storytelling. And so far, we've covered so many different topics and sides of this just in this first chapter or just in this first short story, such as the Hollywood effect. How do we describe this short story in just one or two sentences? The increased specificity tactic, where we continually add more information to our characters, to our scenery, and draw the reader in. The other learning we've had is as long as the reader wants to read the next line, we are doing a good job. So, as we hop back into the short story, here we start once again. "Hold on, Vasilievna," said Semyon. The cart lurched violently and was about to turn over. Something heavy fell on Myra Vasilievna's feet. It was her purchases. There was a steep climb uphill over a clayey road. Noisy rivulets were flowing in winding ditches. The water had gullied the road, and how could one drive here? The horses breathed heavily. Hanov got out of the carriage and walked at the edge of the road in his long coat. He was hot. "How's the road?" he repeated and laughed. "This is the way to smash your carriage." "But who tells you to go driving in such weather?" asked Semyon in a surly voice. "You ought to stay home." "I'm bored at home, grandfather. I don't like staying home." Next to old Semyon, he seemed well-built and vigorous, but there was something barely perceptible in his gait which betrayed him as a weak creature, already blighted, approaching its end. And suddenly, it seemed as though there were a whiff of liquor in the woods. Myra Vasilievna felt frightened and was filled with pity for this man who was going to pieces without rhyme or reason, and it occurred to her that if she were his wife or his sister, she would devote her whole life to his rescue. His wife! Life was so ordered that here he was living in his great house alone, while she was living in a God-ordered that here he was living in his great house alone, while she was living in a God-forsaken village alone. And yet, for some reason, the mere thought that he and she might meet on an equal footing and become intimate seemed impossible, absurd. Fundamentally, life was so arranged and human relations were complicated so utterly beyond all understanding that when you thought about it, you were terrified and your heart sank. "And you can't understand," she thought, "why God gives good looks, friendliness, charming, melancholy eyes to weak, unhappy, useless people. Why, they are so attractive." "Here we must turn off to the right," said Hanov, getting into his carriage. "Goodbye. All good wishes." And again she thought of her pupils, of the examination, of the janitor, of the school board, and when the wind brought her the sound of the receding carriage, these thoughts mingled with others. She wanted to think of beautiful eyes, of love, of the happiness that would never be. His wife? It is cold in the morning. There's no one to light the stove. The janitor has gone off somewhere. The children come in as soon as it is light, bringing in snow and mud and making a noise. It's all so uncomfortable, so unpleasant. Her quarters consist of one little room and a kitchen close by. Every day when school is over, she has a headache, and after dinner she has heartburn. She has to collect money from the children for firewood and to pay the janitor and to turn it over to the trustee and then to implore him, that overfed, insolent peasant, for God's sake, to send her firewood. And at night she dreams of examinations, peasants, snowdrifts. And this life has aged and coarsened her, making her homely, angular, and clumsy, as though they had poured lead into her. She is afraid of everything, and in the presence of a member of the Zemstvo board or of the trustee, she gets up and dares not sit down again. And she uses her obsequious expressions when she mentions any one of them. And no one likes her, and life is passing drearily, without warmth, without friendly sympathy, without interesting acquaintances. In her position, how terrible it would be if she were to fall in love. The cart nearly tips. This is George Saunders speaking. We find out that Myra has made some purchases in town. These purchases are now an element of the story. What use, we wonder, will be made of them? Hanov repeats the dumb joke he made on the previous page. Semyon turns on him. "But who tells you to go driving in such weather?" he says in a surly voice. And Hanov's gentle response to this insult from someone beneath him in status, Semyon is a peasant, Hanov a wealthy landowner, tracks satisfyingly with what Myra has told us about Hanov. He's a pushover, spineless, an easy grader. Myra thinks she smells liquor in the woods. She pities Hanov, who's going to pieces without rhyme or reason, and thinks that if she were his wife or sister, she'd devote her whole life to his rescue. But that's impossible. Fundamentally, life was so arranged and human relations were complicated so utterly beyond all understanding that when you thought about it, you were terrified and your heart sank. Then, as if he's just heard Myra ruling out their marriage, Hanov rides right out of the story. Myra barely seems to notice, confirming our sense that she doesn't really consider him a romantic possibility. She doesn't think, "Oh no, he's gone. I failed to interest him." Her mind returns to the school. She thinks of her pupils, of the examination, of the janitor, of the school board. This is now the third time she's done this, withdrawn from the real world into worry about the school. It's a habit with her definite rumination, a measure of how she's been trained and reduced by this life of toil. One of the accomplishments of this story is Chekhov's representation of the way a lonely mind works. Myra's just musing here, doing the sort of light fantasizing we do when we imagining winning the lottery or becoming a senator or telling someone off who hurt our feelings back in high school. Although the story sets us up to feel that Myra might be open to Hanov, it also gives us a plenty of reasons to understand this as both impossible and not to be desired. He's a drunk, an idler, past the age for a reformation. He doesn't seem interested in Myra or in anybody. He's likely had plenty of chances to marry before, but never has. And Myra actually kind of prideful. Even as she's assessing him, we feel her thinking that if they did get together, he'd prove a handful and a disappointment. And yet, Chekhov has her do something lovely. She hears the sound of the receding carriage and suddenly wants to think of beautiful eyes, of love, of the happiness that would never be. She thinks, again, of being his wife, not his sister this time. She's already ruled out the possibility just a few paragraphs earlier, but here it comes again. His wife? The float that is her heart keeps bobbing up, and it's sad. Her mind returns to Hanov, not because he's a great guy or her soulmate, but because, 1, there's nobody else around, that is, in her world, and 2, her loneliness is so extreme. She's lonely, he's nearby. He is nearby, and though he's not lonely exactly, it seems he could use her help. But if you have ever tried to act as a matchmaker, you know that even two extremely lonely people continue to have standards. We can't presume to speak for them. In this case, Myra and Hanoff have already spoken for themselves. Their situation is not two people ripe for love suddenly meet for the first time. It's two people not exactly ripe for love, who, if they were going to become involved, would have done so years ago, meet again. Nobody's expecting anything to happen, and in fact, it would be kind of weird if it did. In the long paragraph on that page, she addresses her own question. His wife? With a dismal recounting of her actual life, the snow, the mud, the discomfort, her tiny room, her headaches, her heartburn, her constant need to beg for funds, this degrading life that has aged and coerced into her. Though she is obsequious, no one likes her, the poor dear. For most of its length, the paragraph seems to be saying, how ridiculous to think that this wealthy man would marry such a drudge as I. Then, in its last line, in her position, how terrible it would be if she were to fall in love. It says something worse. Yes, she's beneath him, but also in her life, as difficult as it is, has no room in it for love, even if he were interested, which apparently isn't. Einstein once said, no worthy problem is ever solved in the plane of its original conception. The story has just written itself out of the plane of its original conception by removing Hanoff as a possible antidote for Myra's loneliness. What now? We might think of a story as a system for the transfer of energy. I'm going to read that again. We might think of a story as a system for the transfer of energy. Energy, hopefully, gets made in the early pages, and the trick in the latter pages is to use that energy. Myra has created unhappy and lonely, and has become more specifically unhappy and lonely with every passing page. That is the energy the story has made and must use. There's vestigial evidence in Myra's thoughts that she wouldn't be so averse to an overture from Hanoff. She considers him handsome and attractive and has an urge to save him from himself. Although the story has been telling us all along that a relationship isn't likely, it won't happen today because it never happened before, we've still been rooting for it to happen. We've been rooting for Myra. We want what she wants, for her not to be so lonely. The energy of the story is being stored in our hope that she'll find some relief. Chekhov, in these first 5 pages, built a door and indicated that he wanted us to go through it. Over that door is a sign. Hanoff might assuage Myra's loneliness. Every time we felt Myra's loneliness, we've glanced hopefully over at that door. Now that door has been shut and locked. Or, actually, it's vanished. Chekhov has, with Hanoff's exit, denied himself the obvious, expected source of resolution. Who knows what Chekhov arrived at this decision, practically speaking, but we can observe what he did. He got rid of Hanoff. Now, there's no danger that the story will take that easy route. This is an important storytelling move we might call ritual, banality, avoidance. If we deny ourselves the crapo version of our story, a better version will, we aspirationally assume, present itself. To refuse to do the crapo thing is to strike a de facto blow for quality. If nothing else, at least we haven't done that. We might think of it this way. Chekhov already has the benefit of our expectation of a romantic development before Myra and Hanoff. We've already pre-imagined that development, so he doesn't go there. He can go past it to whatever the next and presumably more sophisticated solution turns out to be. Chekhov can force his own hand, so to speak, just by taking Hanoff out of the story. If there were a big bowl of candy in your kitchen and that was all you were eating, one way of forcing yourself to eat something better would be to throw the candy away. When I try to explain this notion to my students, I invoke these bracelets we used to make back in the 1960s when I was in grade school. Love beads. We sweet little Chicagoland hippies in training called them that. You put a bead on, then pushed it all the way back to the knot in the string. This cleared the way for new beads. Just so, in a story, we should always be pushing the new bead to the knot. If you know where a story is going, don't hoard it. Make the story go there, now. But then what? What do you do next? You've surrendered your big reveal. Exactly. Often in our doubt that we have a real story to tell, we hold something back, fearing that we don't have anything else. And this can be a form of trickery. Surrendering that thing is a leap of faith that forces the story to attention, saying to it, in effect, you have to do better than that. And now that I've denied you your trick, your first order solution, I know that you will. Consider a story that, in its last lines, reveals that the narrator has been paralyzed all along, and he or she just happened to neglect to mention it. Consider a story in which, late in the game, the narrator is revealed to be not, after all, a person who walked through the Lincoln Park Zoo, but a tiger within it. But all clues was that this case had been carefully concealed to maximize the reveal. The other animals kept calling our tiger Mel and talking to him about the White Sox and so on. A work of art moves us by being honest, and that honesty is apparent in its language and in its form and in its resistance to concealment. Myra's dilemma is still in effect. She's lonely and bored. By removing the first order solution, Hanov, Chekhov has made his story more ambitious. In its early pages it said, once there was a lonely person. It might have gone on to say, isn't that wonderful? That lonely person met another lonely person, and now is neither of them is lonely. By declining to go there, Chekhov has created a story that now begins asking a more profound question. What if a lonely person can find no way out of her loneliness? This is where, to me, Douglas, the story starts to feel big. It's saying, loneliness is real and consequential, and there's no easy way out of it for some of us who are in it, and sometimes there's no way out at all. We care about Myra. We expect Hanov to help her, and suddenly he's gone. Now what? There you have it, the next passage of In the Cart from A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, or The Cart, that is. Tune back in tomorrow. We'll keep reading, and we'll see what has happened next to Myra and Hanov, now that Chekhov has taken away what could have been the easy solution. And we call that the ritual banality avoidance. Take care. I'm Philip Chen, and we are magical.